Hey, so welcome to another podcast episode of the Soulful Side of Life with me, Portee. I hope you're well and having a good week. And I had the privilege of interviewing Yana Jenay Carter, and I really enjoyed it because I just read her book. To give you a little bit of info about Yana, she is a writer, she is a Bible teacher who seeks to help others think well about faith and culture. And her debut book is Living Beyond Offense, Doing the Hard Work of Forgiveness God's Way. And I have to tell you, I enjoyed the book, really enjoyed it. I have read through it, made highlightings, and have just, because it's an area that I have struggled with, offense, forgiveness, it was timely. And those things in life that we struggle with, and that the Lord is trying to bring us into his plan of sanctification for our lives. When we get resources, they can be just manna from heaven. And a lot of the things that she writes about were pertinent to my life. And I would recommend that if unforgiveness or forgiveness and being easily offended is something that you struggle with, read her book, because there's going to be a lot of wisdom nuggets in there, and probably some areas in which God's trying to talk to you about. Yana has served in full-time ministry for 15 years in both church and parachurch settings, and has contributed to the Jude 3 projects, Through the Eyes of Color and Swing Low, as well as other projects. And she's the host of her own podcast, Living Single with Yana Jenay, where she explores the nuances of singleness beyond societal expectations. So enjoy this podcast episode with Yana. We touch on all things offense and forgiveness, and she pours in more wisdom nuggets. So enjoy. Okay, Yana, thank you so much for joining my podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm so honored to be a guest.
Yeah, it's really an honor to speak with you. Jumping right on in, can you talk a little bit about yourself, and specifically in the context of what inspired you to write Living Beyond Defense?
Yeah, so I've been writing for a few years now, mostly with the Jude 3 project, and we've done some curriculum with them around sort of Black apologetics, understanding what we believe and why we believe it, uh, and so the more opportunities I got to write, the more opportunities like sort of came my way, and so this publisher, Harvest House, actually reached out to me and invited me to consider writing a book. But I thought we would write a book about singleness. I thought we would write a book about maybe a Bible study on the book of Ruth, because I was really enamored with that story and just some of the things the Lord was revealing to me through it. But through our conversations, we ended up landing on forgiveness, and I had some thoughts about it, but I didn't think I had enough thoughts to make up a whole book. And so I think after that sort of seemed like it was going to be the direction of the book, I actually sort of like ghosted the publisher, just because I didn't feel qualified to write this book. I could think about people in my life that I had broken relationships with. And I just was like, man, I think this is the book you have to write when you're like 50, and 60. You've been through enough. You've grown in all the ways you sort of, need to grow. And so yeah, just was like not sure, if this was the right book for me, particularly the first one out. But then I went to a conference and they were having a conversation about church hurt. And I realized that people are going to live beyond their church hurt, that forgiveness is a part of the work that they need to do. And though everyone at the conference, we all want people to find their way back to the church. When I sort of posed the question of like, how does forgiveness, fit in this conversation, no one really had an answer. And I was kind of taken aback by that, because I was like, man, we're the people of God. We we should have much to say on forgiveness. However, in hindsight, I think I do understand why there was so much pause in the room, and I think it's because so many of us have grown up with maybe faulty ideas of what forgiveness is and how do we do it. And often, particularly in Christian spaces, sort of teaching on forgiveness is absent of teaching on accountability. And how do we, hold people accountable for their sins and their wrongs and the ways that they've hurt us. And so in the book, we talk about what forgiveness is, but we also talk about what it's not. That it's not forgetting, it's not ignoring, and sweeping things under the rug. But it's also not reconciling with people, with without acknowledging what happened. And so, my hope is that in this book, we give people a clear definition of what forgiveness is, and we give them practical, like. Uh, Ways to move towards forgiveness with those who've offended them.
How would you define offense and how would you define forgiveness?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And so offense is there's a couple ways to think about this because I think there are sometimes things that we are offended by that are, biblically would classify as sin. And then there are things that we take offense to that are more like personal preferences or um unmet expectations and those kinds of things. And even though that is real, I would say offense is anything that someone does towards someone that falls short of God's ideal for how we are to relate to one another. And so, but I do think sometimes we take offense to things that are not classified as biblical sin. It's more so like our preferences. It's more so our family background, our cultural norms, and those kinds of things. And I think those are things that we need to be sensitive to when we are walking through a fence. Forgiveness is the merciful decision to release an offender of their debt and to not retaliate against them in anger. And so, sort of the framework for that definition comes from Matthew 18, the parable of the unforgiving servant. And so we see this man who owes a debt that he cannot pay. And the first thing we see is he pleads with his master, asking him for forgiveness. And then the text says that the master looks upon him with pity. And that word pity is mercy. And so that language, merciful decision, is important. One, because uh, we don't forgive people because they deserve it. Like we forgive people because when we didn't deserve it, Jesus forgave us. And so mercy is extending to someone something that they don't deserve. And then also it's a decision. So it's not a feeling. And I think this was really important for me because I am a high feeler. So for most of my life, particularly my relationship with my dad, when I was just struggling to forgive him, I often was like, man, if I have to wait for my feelings to change, like I'm not sure if I'm ever going to arrive there. And so, but we want to release them of their debt, what they owe us, which may not be monetary, but it may, we may feel like they owe us an apology. We may feel like they owe us groveling and all these kinds of things, but we're releasing them of the responsibility to pay us back. That doesn't mean that we don't still have a debt. That doesn't mean that they haven't still left us in some sort of deficit, but we're just releasing them of the responsibility to pay us back. And then we're choosing to not retaliate against them in anger. And so we're obeying Jesus' command to not go eye for an eye or tooth for a tooth, but to turn the other cheek.
Why would you say forgiveness is very important to God? I've heard pastors say it's a salvation issue. I don't know if you agree with that, but why do you think God takes it so seriously and that we're called to forgive everyone?
Yeah. Well, Jesus takes forgiveness very seriously. It's in the Sermon on the Mount. So he talks about it in his first sermon. It's also in the Lord's Prayer. Forgive us as we forgive our debtors. And then again, it's there in Matthew 18, where Jesus is telling the parable of the unforgiving servant. And so after this servant is forgiven, he goes and finds a fellow servant who owes him a lesser debt, and he instead of forgiving him of that debt, he has him locked up until he can pay him back. So he doesn't extend to this fellow servant the same mercy that he received. And the text says that the townspeople, they don't like it. And so they go and they report back to the master what has happened. And then the master confronts this unforgiving servant and it's like, man, how could you not extend this mercy that I extended to you to other people? And then he also says, we should be merciful as we receive mercy. And he's like, and if you don't, you will not receive mercy. If you're not merciful, you won't receive mercy. And I think that's really interesting because Jesus makes forgiveness. He puts our ability to forgive in uh the category of eternity, right? And so there's no pastor who's doing this. Jesus does this. And what's interesting, if you read through Matthew, most of Jesus's parables in that section, they deal with eternity. And he's showing people how to access the kingdom in a sense. And so I would say that I still believe, we're saved by grace through faith, you know, but I would think that Jesus would say that anyone who truly understands that they have been forgiven forgives. And so if we have a struggle with for forgiving other people, the application of this parable is for us to go back to the time when we first believed, to the first time that we received Jesus's forgiveness and allow that forgiveness to overflow in our lives in such a way that we're able to extend that forgiveness to others. And so if you have a forgiveness problem, it might be that you have a gospel problem, that you haven't truly understood the grace that you have received. And I think that's why Jesus sort of wraps his teaching and forgiveness with eternity. And even often is found saying that we are to forgive as we have been forgiven, because those two are interconnected.
How long did it take you to do this whole book project from start to finish?
Yeah. So yeah, that's a great question. I think the publishers at first they gave me like maybe 8 months to write the book. And I was like, oh yeah, that's plenty of time. Not gonna be a problem. And then as I started to write, I was like, man, I'm in over my head. And so I think altogether it was like an 18-month process of writing. And then of course on top of that you have editing and all those kinds of things. So it was a lot of work, a lot of research, a lot of studying God's word. It was very important for me that this book really was rooted in the teachings of Jesus, not the teachings of Yana. And so each chapter we're dealing with some sort of biblical passage to help shape our minds around how do we do this work of forgiveness. And I also studied like every instance of forgiveness in scripture, just because I wanted to make sure that I was really given a biblical perspective on it, and not missing anything. I'm pretty sure I missed some things because I'm a human being, but I
Mhm.
wanted to do my due diligence in this process.
You did certainly cover a lot of things. Yeah. How has your relationship with God changed in the
Hmm.
topic of offense since writing the book?
Yeah, I think it's changed the most as it relates to trust. I
Mhm.
think I'm starting to really realize that forgiveness is a matter of trust
Mm.
and me trusting whether or not God will enact justice on my behalf. And when I know that God will do that, when I know that God will take care of the justice part, I'm able to do what He's commanded me to do, which is to forgive, which is to release this person of their responsibility to pay me back and to not try to take things in my own hands by retaliating against them. So yeah, so that's been the huge thing for me. Even as I've walked through offenses post the book, it's like, man, can I trust the Lord with this person? Can I trust the Lord even with the pain that I feel? And so it's really me diverting my eyes from my offender to the Lord, and trusting Him to heal me, to restore me, and then also trusting Him to be faithful to His word and you know, uh, cause righteousness to shine like the noonday sun.
Yeah. Um, we were talking before the recording started about I shared that I'm a highly sensitive person, and I think when you're highly sensitive, it can you really wrestle with forgiveness, and you can continue to harp on why did they do this, and you can remember every detail of
Yeah.
everything. Like, if I were to go too deep, I'll be like, yeah, in 2005 when I was standing outside and it was a red house across the street and you said this line and then I said that and then some people what. And I think that as I've wrestled with forgiveness myself, I feel that one reason why the Lord calls us to forgive is because there are things in this other person that we don't know, other hurts they've
Mm.
gone through, their own their culture, what happened in their childhood. It's like watching a movie sometimes and the viewer has knowledge of something that's happened, but a character in the movie doesn't have that knowledge yet. And God has knowledge on all of us and
Mhm.
what happened to us at 5 years old and why we tend to hurt people or they hurt. So I just think because it can be so messy and so complicated that and because God knows all of the reasons of why something happened, we're just called to forgive and let go because we don't know all of the details. And that
Mhm.
has helped me just kind of release people and forgive because I don't know all the details of their life. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's real. I mean, that's what makes God the best judge in
Mhm.
these things, because he is all knowing. And he sees things that we don't see, even down to people's history, the personal history, the trauma they've experienced, their motives, and those kinds of things. And so I'm often uh, praying through Psalm 131, where it says, my eyes are not haughty, my heart is not proud. I do not concern myself with things that are too great, are too wonderful for me. And sometimes the things that are too great and too wonderful for me are people's motives,
Mhm.
people's whys. And so I am learning uh, to to acknowledge someone's behavior without sort of attaching an intent to it unless there is a pattern, and that sort of gives me insight to why they may be doing what they're doing, or they confirm it,
Yeah.
and so because at the end of the day, I'm not people's judge, and when we choose to not forgive, we are choosing to be people's judge. But as it says in James 4, there's only one lawgiver, there's only one judge. And James' point is that it's not us.
Yeah.
It is not us. It is Jesus Christ, the righteous one, who knows all, who sees all, and who is good. And so he knows the right amount of justice to enact in any and every situation. We, on the other hand, we do not. We do not. And so it is better for us to leave people in the hands of God,
Yeah.
than to do things on our own. Because when we retaliate against other people, we are now participating in sin. We are now participating in bringing about more sort of brokenness into the world. But we are called to be agents of light. We are called to be shalom makers in God's world. But it's hard because it requires us to die to ourselves. Forgiveness requires us to die to ourselves. But that makes sense to me, Allie, because forgiveness required Jesus to die. In order for Jesus to die for the sins of humanity, he had to die. And so I'm learning more and more to look to the cross and to look to what Jesus has done for me, and to draw strength and inspiration to forgive others as well.
Yeah, and it goes in line with a line you wrote in the book where you write, "We are just as fallen as the person with whom we've taken offense," which
Mhm.
also goes in line with John Bevere, his book, The Bait of Satan. A person who cannot forgive has forgotten how much a great debt God has forgiven them.
Mhm.
And There was a sermon at the church I went to in the UK when I lived there, where the pastor said Jesus died for the oppressor and the oppressed, for
Mhm,
Pharaoh and the Israelites.
mhm,
And that gives great perspective because, yeah, Jesus came for both sides. And it just helps me when I keep that picture in my mind uh,
mhm.
to forgive because I'm
Yeah,
better than the oppressor.
yeah. Jesus is as interested in your salvation as he is in the salvation of your offender. He died for all. And I think that part is hard because I know for some people, they want the Lord to get that person
Yeah.
who hurt them. And if that's where you are, I would say take that to Jesus, and continue to sit with his word and meditating on the fact that he's compassionate and gracious and slow to anger and how his grace has arrived in your life, and ask the Lord to change your heart, so that you would root for the salvation of your offender, not their destruction.
And I that's what makes Christianity different, I think, from other faiths in the world. I had a friend in college, a Jewish guy, and I would be trying to at times share Jesus with him. And we got on the topic of forgiveness, and he said, "So you're telling me that if Adolf Hitler were to asked for forgiveness. He had massacred 6 million Jews, but before he died, he was to genuinely repent and ask for forgiveness that he could make it into heaven." And I said, yeah. If he were to really, really repent and God knows his heart, yes. And that's
Mhm,
what makes Christianity different from other
mhm,
world faiths. And he's like, I can't agree with that, yeah. And I get it, as a Jew, that's hard to grapple with. As an African American, to say, "Oh, the worst slave master who was a terror to blacks," "Oh, you're telling me they could make it into heaven if they forgive?" Yeah. And,
mhm.
these are hard things to wrestle with when your people have been oppressed, but that's what Jesus offers.
Yeah, yeah. I think I don't remember the author who says it, but it's scandalous grace, and grace is not fair. Our receiving of God's grace is a scandalous, gift. But I think what I'm drawn to right now is just in Romans where it talks about how Jesus, God is the just justifier, and so for that person who's wrestling with that, I think the question is, if God were to quote unquote let them get away with it, is he just and is he good? And God is just and he is good, but he poured out the totality of his wrath on his son, and his son goes in our place, allowing any and every kind of sinner to find the grace that they need. And yes, it is completely undeserving, and uh, but it just points to the glory and the power, and the mystery of what God does through Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah, in the book, you talk about when friends are offenders, and, I find that friendship hurts are they can be very painful, like, especially for women. Like, when your girlfriend hurts you, it could be worse than, I don't know, a breakup with a guy. Uh because women are like soul sisters, you know?
Okay.
So what does forgiveness look like in close friendships? How do you point
Yeah.
in the book?
Yeah. No, I talk about this times in my life with friends where I've failed and and maybe by God's grace was able to repair a relationship. And I think it kind of all starts really with how we think about friendship. I think a lot of times people think about friendship as an accessory to life, that it's not a necessity. And because of that, we can think of friendship as this place that we're supposed to go to just have fun. And so It's this refuge from all of the hevel of life that the writer of Ecclesiastes talks about, where he talks about, all of life is vanity of vanities, and things like that. Like, things just can go wrong. And we live in a broken and fallen world where things go often wrong. And so I think we think, and I can be guilty of thinking of my friendships as this place that's supposed to be this safe refuge from all of the hardships of life. But sometimes friendship is the hevel. It is it is the hard stuff of life. And one of the things the Lord's been teaching me is that friendship isn't primarily for my enjoyment. Friendship is primarily for God's glory. And I know that sounds really extreme, but Romans 11, that last verse says, all things are from him, through him, and to him. And friendship falls into that category. Friendships are from God, they are a gift from God. And if we're going to do friendships well and have enduring, meaningful relationships, then we need to do them through Christ, through his spirit. But we engage in our friendships, in reverence back to God. And so that's been something that's really shifted how I show up in my friendships, and particularly when there's conflict, right? And so uh, I think Kobe Campbell, she says this, every meaningful relationship will experience some kind of rupture. Every single one, because no one is good but God, right? And so we live in a broken, fallen world with broken and fallen people, and we are a part of the brokenness as well. And so conflict's going to happen. The question is, do you know how to get on the other side of that conflict? Do you know how to live beyond offense? Do you know how to have conversations where you share how someone has hurt you without being accusatory, or without, trying to get your lick back in the process, like, and just saying, like, hey friend, I know you're having a bad day the other day, but when you said this, man, it kind of cut a little deep. And so I just wanted to see if we can have a conversation about that, and just, leaning into the discomfort. But I think what usually happens is that when we have issues in our friendships, we run. When things get tough, we run, because that's supposed to be the place where we have fun, that's supposed to be the place where we experience ease. But sometimes that's not true. And I would say that in order for us to have the kind of relationships that we want with people in general, we have to learn how to get to the other side of conflict. If we want relationships where we feel loved, where we feel safe, where we feel known and understood, like, it is in conflict that those things sort of come to the surface even more. For example, one of my friends is like, I know that she loves me because she is stuck with me through the conflict. She said hard things to me, and she's let me say hard things to her. And in that, we've had really, really hard conversations, but through that, we've grown in understanding. And the good thing is that we don't have those same kind of conflicts, that we used to have, because we've been able to live beyond that offense. And now I do feel like she's a kind of safe place for me. But I do know that there's potential for us to have more conflict. And my prayer that by God's grace that He would help us to work through that. But usually what happens is someone, says something hurtful or does something hurtful, and we ghost and we cancel and we run. But if we want meaningful relationships, we got to learn how to stay long enough to see what's relationally possible. I'm not advocating for us to be in abusive relationships, but in the case of abuse, that relationship needs to come to an end. But when there's conflict that maybe we can work through, I wonder what would happen if we would stay long enough to see what's relationally possible.
Yeah, there was it what's that Christian author, Havilah, is it Cunningham or something like that? And I saw this Instagram post where she said, a lot of marriage is hard in those early years, especially when the children come in the early years. But she said, I wish people would stick around because it gets so much better as the kids get older, as they
Uh-huh.
move out of the house. And I feel like the Lord has been convicting and pointing out to me, because we in this social media 2026 world, you're confronted with, take care of yourself. If they hurt you, let them go.
Mhm.
Don't deal with, put yourself first. And you point this out in the book a little bit that, these kinds of messages, yeah, we can't take disrespect and, but it's a cut and run kind of messaging that we're getting if we're not being respected and so on and so forth. And what's your advice on I know you said we stick around a little bit, but in these messagings that we're getting on social media, don't tolerate this or that, what are your thoughts? Because, Christine Kane, there's a quote that I like by her that I've held on to for a few years where she said, you got to loosely learn to hold on to people. And I feel like in the context, what she means is like, and you said in the book, we have to make peace that this is a broken, fallen world and where offense is. So because of that, I guess we learn to loosely hold on to people because we don't know what's going to happen. So I know I'm all over the place here, but how do we navigate these messages that we're getting? Don't tolerate this. Take care of yourself. Put yourself first. If they disrespect you, cut them
Mhm.
out with
Mhm.
the love of Christ.
Yeah.
Uh,
I think it's your question is a worldview
Yeah.
question. And
Mm.
so and in the book, I'm trying to invite people to accept a biblical worldview about how we are to move relationally.
Mhm.
And I think, messages like protect your peace, get rid of toxic people, and those kinds of things, they they aren't the message of Jesus.
Mhm.
And so I think when someone is saying get rid of toxic people, my question is, how are you defining toxic? And so one of my friends, Dr. Evan Marbury, who's a counselor and pastor, he says we have to be able to discern the difference between hurt and harm. Meaning, hurt is something that we're going to experience in a broken and fallen world with broken and fallen people. People are going to hurt us. People who love us, people who do not intend to hurt us, will hurt us. And we will hurt other people, people that we don't intend to hurt. Maybe we hurt them because we didn't respond to their text message because we were busy or because we were tired or because we were sick. And now they're hurt. They're experiencing some sort of disappointment. A lot of times we aren't hurting people intentionally, but we do it because we are human. But then there's harm. That's someone who's manipulative and they're gaslighting and they're not repentive and they don't tell the truth. Those are like abusive, sort of toxic behaviors. And when someone is living in those ways, then it's like, okay, we probably do need to hold those relationships loosely. I think the danger in saying that we need to hold people loosely is that it gives people an out when they don't need one. And so there are some times when you don't need to hold people loosely, but then you need to go back to them. And so, for example, Jesus says, "Hey, if your brother or sister sins against you, go to him." He doesn't say hold that person loosely. He says go back to them to have the hard conversation. And then if they don't listen to you, he doesn't tell you to go give up. He tells you, no, go get two witnesses. Because right now, what you have is a brother or sister who's in an unrepentant state. And so he's like literally encouraging us to do everything that we can possible to bring this person back into relationship, not just with you, but with the Lord. Because if the person has sinned against you, they have also sinned against God. What's interesting is like right before Jesus gives this instruction about going to your brother and sister who sinned against you, he talks about leaving the 99 to go get the one. Like to leave the comfort of the 99 to go after the one. And I think I think Matthew's being very intentional on how he's stacking these things because he wants us to see that Jesus wants us to be the kind of people who go after people, not people who ghost, when someone sins against us. And so I think for me, anytime I hear messaging from the culture, I have to take that and open my Bible to discern, does this agree with what Jesus is calling his people to? Like, is this in step with the ethic of Jesus's kingdom? Or is it out of step with the ethic of Jesus' kingdom? And so I remember like just, when the self-care movement came out, it's like, okay, this how do I and like make sense of this when Jesus literally called me to pick up my cross and die daily? That didn't mean that I just did away with, self-care movement because I like self-care, but it was just kind of like self-care should not be at the expense of obeying Jesus,
Mm,
right? And I think the same thing applies here relationally. Jesus doesn't call us to protect our peace. He calls us to make peace. He says, "Blessed are the peace makers." And so for me, when I'm, even in my own life, when I'm tempted to protect my peace because I don't want to have the hard conversation or I'm uncomfortable, it's awkward. Like then I have to go against the grain of what I feel to obey Jesus and seek to make peace, to be able to endure that discomfort. But we don't like discomfort. I don't like discomfort. And so anything that's uncomfortable, we sort of like, oh no, I don't want to do that. I gotta protect my peace. I gotta, my emotional well-being. And I'm not saying that those things aren't important, but I think sometimes we lean on those things so much
mm.
that it impedes on our ability to obey Jesus.
Yeah. Okay, a few last questions. You talk about forgiveness is not forgetting. Why is remembering part of healing?
Oh yeah. I think one, we cannot forgive something that we're not willing to honestly acknowledge. And I think we have to remember on some level what happened on so that we can identify certain behaviors in people who may be unsafe moving forward, and so that we can learn how to to take care of ourselves and yes, protect ourselves when we are dealing with someone who is unsafe. And I think even for me, I need to remember how God has healed me, right? In certain relationships where things went wrong or I got hurt. I need to remember the past and how the Lord healed me so that I can have hope when it happens again. Because I think that's the hardest thing about this is that on any given day, someone can sin against us in small or life-changing ways. And so every day we kind of need to be prepared to do the work of forgiveness, not out of fear, but just out of an acceptance of the reality that we are in. And so even now, as I'm walking through something that's hard relationally, what is giving me hope, what is giving me strength for moving through this is remembering all the time that the Lord healed me in the past, and also, learning from the places where maybe I could have made a different decision because maybe I stayed too long, or I didn't allow that person to feel the full weight of what they did because I just wanted to save them from that discomfort. Or maybe I popped off and said something, and so I'm learning from those experiences as well, even as I move forward in new ones.
When confronting and two people trying to maybe possibly reconcile, what are the Jesus signs of when you're confronting someone or you're being confronted with something that you did to someone? What are the best ways to receive the confronting, to admit wrong? What should you be looking for if you're the confronter with the behavior of the person? Are they receiving? Are they understanding?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when I'm being confronted, because I am naturally a sensitive person, I can become easily sort of offensive and defensive. So knowing that about myself, I try to be slow to speak. And so I allow the person to say what they need to say, and if in that moment I can affirm that, hey, that I'm sorry about that, I'll own it. I'll say I'm sorry. And maybe have a conversation on how we can move forward. It just kind of depends on how I'm doing that day. But that's the ideal response, is to listen. If they say something, give me feedback or confront me about something and I don't agree what I usually do is I take some time. And so I'll say like, "Hey, I really appreciate you bringing that concern to me. Um I I would like to sit with this for a couple of days, and get back to you. Can we schedule some time to meet later on this week?" I usually like to put a date on it because that gives that kind of that the other person this assurance that we're going to come back to it, but I'm going to need some time. And during that time, I'm asking and inviting the Lord to search my heart, to test and know my anxious thoughts, to see if there's any grievous way in me, and to lead me in the way of everlasting. So that's Psalm 139:23 through 24. I'm probably also reading 1 Corinthians 13, probably also reading Matthew 18, just inviting the Spirit to help me to know how to think through this and how to respond to this person. If the person makes a sort of uh, a claim or a critique on my character, then what I usually do is I take that to somebody else. When I say like, "Hey, I got this feedback this week," I don't necessarily need to tell them who that feedback came from. But it's like, "Hey, I got this little piece of feedback this week. Uh, I'm struggling with receiving it. Can you let me know if you see this in any way, in my life or in the way that I lead and things like that?" And so I'll invite somebody else into that. And if I still come to a place where I don't agree, I'll probably go back to that person and say, "Hey, um, yeah, so you were saying that maybe I wasn't, being, gentle enough in this moment. And it's always my goal to be gentle, to be considerate, to ask questions and those kinds of things. But the more I think about it, I'm not sure what else I could have done in that moment. But I am aware that it hurt you. And so can we please maybe we can talk about how to move forward. So I'm not necessarily apologizing because I don't get the sense that I've done anything wrong, but I am asking the question like, how can you and I move forward with better understanding? And I think it's important to not apologize when it's not sincere. Because I think sometimes we can apologize just because we want to move on, but that actually dishonors the person more than it honors the person because you're giving them a fake kind of apology. You're not really acknowledging their feelings. You're just trying to move beyond them and move on to the next thing. But I think there's a way to still acknowledge what they feel, even though you don't disagree with it, and then to find a new way forward. So that's how I would handle it if I were being confronted. But that is my most ideal self, and we see her maybe once or twice a week. And so but that is how I try as best to handle those things because I know that I can be overly sensitive and defensive.
Gotcha. Two last questions. I'm in the entertainment fashion world, and these are worlds where offense, unforgiveness, transactional relationships, people's worldview is the farthest thing from a kingdom mindset as you can get. What advice do you and I've met a handful of believers in these spaces. It's very rare, but we are there. What advice do you have to believers who are working in these extremely carnal spaces where offense, unforgiveness, using people is the norm?
It's tough, you
Yeah.
know, because it's easy to just take up the way of the space, you know, and um, I would say one for anyone who's in a space like that, like you have to be anchored to Christ and Christian community. You need that. You need that. And so even if there are a few people in that space that are Christians, it's like, how do you all band together to care for one another, to love one another, encourage one another, and also like hold each other accountable in that. I think also like you need to have uh your life has to be tethered to Christ in a way that's not just like I do my quiet time every day, but where your hope and your trust, your reliance and your dependence is on God so that you don't move in that space in such a way that is self-centered and self-preserving. And so you're gonna, like confession, repentance, those are disciplines that you're gonna need often. Just even confessing the sinful stuff in your heart, that maybe you don't act upon. Like those are things that you would need to confess often to the Lord and to others. And I think, it's this awareness that we are called to be a light in the world, and so how do you live your life on mission in that space? And that doesn't mean you're always like, sharing the gospel and asking people how to pray. If you could pray for them. There's a time and place for that. But it's more so just showing up in the space of being different, being a trustworthy person, being someone who doesn't gossip. I mean, that goes a long way. When I know it feels like weird, but it's like when you choose to not gossip with people and you're like, hey, I don't really feel comfortable with the way that we're talking about Joanne right now. And so if we can, let's pivot the conversation to something else.
Mm,
Or hey, I get it. Yeah, they could have spoke a little bit kindly, but we don't know what kind of day they're having. And so maybe we can just try to uh be thoughtful of where they are. And like when you start cutting that stuff off, then people start to see that you're a trustworthy person. Yeah, they might, call you a goody two shoes or whatever like that. But when they're going through something, you can likely become their confidant. Why? Because they know that you're not going to tell their business. They
yeah.
know that you're trustworthy. And so, yes, I think being a light and seeing how God can use that for his glory, and having that sort of awareness on you every day as you go in and out of your job.
Yeah. Last question.
Mhm.
For those who are sensitive and highly sensitive, what advice, and I know they'll have to get the book and read the book. It's a great book.
Thank you.
Uh,
Praise God.
yeah, any quick one-liners, couple liners on if you're a sensitive person, how to deal with offense?
Yeah, it really is Psalm 139,
Mm.
23 through 24 for me. And it's something I have to pray often when I am offended. And it's me like just learning how to slow down and ask the Lord to search my heart, to test and see if whether or not what I'm offended about is is true, you know, or if it's self-centered. And so I think about one time, a friend of mine who's usually really, really calm, she snapped at me and I was ready to to snap back. And, thankfully, I was more of my ideal self that day, and the Lord caught me before my words came out my mouth, and I just started to think about all the stuff she had going on
Yeah.
and started to think about how she never snaps at me, like, this is not who she was, and how this was probably more so, less about me and more about, like, how she's doing and, like, how can I just turn the corner and create space. And I remember, like, I was like, "Hey, I'm gonna cook dinner. I'm gonna" like, and just help to ease some of the stress. We talked about it later,
Mm.
but it was just kind of like, in this moment, what my sister needs is care and love, and she actually does need a safe place to crash out, because she's having a really, really hard day. And so, it's me stepping back and doing that Psalm 139, 23, and 24 work. But then there are times when I do that and it's like, "Nope, what they did was wrong and now I need to be brave enough to say something about it." But I'm not saying something about it just primarily for my own vindication. I'm learning to say something for the good of the other person. So because their behavior is a deviation, maybe from who I've known them to be, or it's a deviation from who Christ has called us to be. And I just want to be a voice calling in the wind, inviting them back to themselves. But I would say doing that Psalm 139, 23 through 24 work, and also just learning how to be aware of what's going on in your body and what you're feeling. I'm often telling myself, Yana, don't obey your anxiety. I also go on walks sometimes when I'm feeling a lot of things, just so that I can process and move those feelings through my body. And so I do some somatic things as well, that help me, so that I don't hold offense in my body unnecessarily.
I see. Well, Yana, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for obeying the Lord and writing this book.
Mhm.
And yeah,
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Yeah, and I'm excited that you enjoyed the book. That means a lot.
yeah, yeah. The Lord was speaking to me through the book, so it was very timely. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
praise God.
Well, God bless.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you. I hope that you enjoyed this podcast episode and that you have found a soulful connection to the conversation. God bless you, and until the next episode, go bless somebody else.